Friends, if you want to watch the fun-filled family comedy movie Home Alone 4 in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the very first time, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on exciting updates and detailed breakdowns of your favorite movies. Today's video is going to be all about Home Alone 4, a movie that brings back the beloved Home Alone series with new twists, new adventures, and a fresh take on the story we all know and love. We will talk about what this movie is all about, where you can watch it, and uncover all the interesting behind-the-scenes details that make it unique. In today's video, I am going to cover everything from the beginning to the end. We'll discuss on which OTT platform or satellite channel you can find this movie, and what is the best way to watch it so you get the full fun experience. We'll also take a look at the technical department of the movie, from the direction to the cinematography, editing, and the overall production quality. Then we'll move into the music department, exploring how the background score and soundtrack add energy and emotion to the story. Of course, we cannot forget about the production journey. So I'll tell you about the pre-production stage where planning and casting took place, the filming process that brought the story to life, and the post-production stage where editing and finishing touches were made to polish the movie for release. We'll also discuss the budget of the film and how much it collected at the box office, giving you an idea of how successful this installment in the Home Alone franchise turned out to be. Now coming to the story, I'll give you a small review of the plot and explain how this fourth entry carries on the spirit of the original while introducing some new ideas. You'll get to hear about the hilarious situations, the traps, and of course the classic cat and mouse games that make Home Alone movies so entertaining. Apart from that, we'll talk in detail about the cast, which actors played which characters, and how their performances shaped the film. You'll know exactly who stepped into the shoes of the iconic characters, and whether they lived up to the charm of the earlier films. We will also go through some fun facts about this movie, little-known details about its making, and how it connects to the rest of the Home Alone series. So friends, that's why I request you to watch this video till the end, because there's a lot of exciting information, behind-the-scenes stories, and fun details you won't want to miss. So without wasting any more time, let's start the video and dive straight into the world of Home Alone 4. The story of Home Alone 4 unfolds in a way that feels both familiar and slightly different from the earlier entries. At its core, the film keeps a very straightforward, linear narrative, but the emotional backdrop shifts the tone. From the very beginning, the audience is introduced to Kevin's new reality. His parents are separated, his father is dating a wealthy woman named Natalie, and Kevin is caught between two households. This choice sets the stage for the entire narrative, because unlike the earlier films where Kevin was accidentally left behind, here he's intentionally placed in an unfamiliar environment that doubles as both a luxury playground and an emotional battlefield. The mansion Natalie lives in is extravagant, full of secret doors, gadgets, and vast spaces that can be turned into either safe havens or dangerous traps. The moment Kevin steps into this new setting, the narrative signals that this story will balance comedy hijinks with themes of family loyalty and belonging. The first major turning point comes when Kevin, already struggling with the fallout of his parents' split and the awkwardness of his father's new relationship, discovers that Marv, the bumbling burglar from the earlier movies, has returned, this time accompanied by his partner Vera. Their goal isn't just to loot the house, but to kidnap a member of royalty who's visiting. This immediately reframes the narrative into a classic kid versus intruders showdown, but with higher stakes than before. Kevin's discovery forces him into action, and the story now splits into two parallel tracks. The adults who are too distracted by romance, money, or denial to notice the danger, and Kevin who must once again shoulder the responsibility of defending the home. The film is built around a steady rhythm of discovery, invention, and escalation. Kevin first notices clues that something isn't right, then he sets out to confirm his suspicions, and finally he begins to engineer the elaborate traps that define the Home Alone series. Unlike the original film, where the traps were set in a suburban home with familiar household objects. Here the mansion's scale and Natalie's wealth allow for larger, more outrageous setups. Every trap has to feel bigger, more theatrical, and more ridiculous, which gives the story a certain over-the-top energy. Each time Kevin foils Marv and Vera, the film adds another layer of comedy but also raises the sense of danger because the thieves, though incompetent, are persistent. Another narrative twist comes mid-story when Kevin realizes that the danger doesn't just come from outside the mansion. Someone inside has been helping the intruders. This betrayal creates a fresh sense of tension because the space that once seemed like a safe fortress suddenly becomes compromised. It also deepens Kevin's sense of isolation. Not only does he have to battle the thieves, but he also has to deal with the fact that the adults around him are either ignoring him, doubting him, or outright working against him. This plot choice weaves in a more emotional layer. Kevin isn't just proving his cleverness, he's proving his independence and determination in a world where even the people he should be able to trust don't take him seriously. As the story heads into its climax, the trap sequences become the engine of the film. Kevin uses everything at his disposal, gadgets, furniture, plumbing, and mansion tech, to turn the house into a battlefield of slapstick chaos. The burglars are humiliated in increasingly wild ways, the betrayals are exposed, and Kevin's ingenuity is put on full display. What makes this climax stand out is that it doesn't just resolve the burglary, it also forces the adults to confront their mistakes. Kevin's father George sees the lengths his son is willing to go to protect family, and this moment brings the fractured McCallisters back together in spirit, if not entirely in circumstance. Thematically, the narrative keeps circling back to the idea of childhood agency. Kevin is the smallest character in the film, yet he holds all the power when it comes to problem-solving, defending the home, and outsmarting the villains. This fantasy of a child being able to turn the tables on adults remains the heart of the Home Alone series. But Home Alone 4 also tries, in its own way, to tackle more grown-up themes like divorce, blended families, and the uncertainty of change. It doesn't explore these themes deeply. The story remains lighthearted and slapstick-driven, but their presence gives the narrative a slightly different emotional texture than the earlier films. The emotional and thematic payoff comes in the final act, when Kevin's traps not only defeat the intruders but also push the adults toward clarity. The mansion's chaos ends with laughter, reconciliation, and a reminder that, at the end of the day, family unity matters more than wealth, status, or appearances. The conventional structure, setup, rising conflict, twist, climax, and resolution ensures that the story never loses its sense of forward momentum. There are no experiments with nonlinear storytelling or perspective shifts, but the movie doesn't need them. Its strength lies in the steady build of comedic set pieces layered over a warm, if simplified, message about family bonds. Characters in Home Alone 4 wear their roles like costumes designed to do two things at once: make you laugh and keep the story moving, and that dual purpose shapes how deep they go. Some get surprising emotional weight, others stay deliciously cartoonish. Kevin sits at the center and carries most of the film's emotional freight. He's not just a wisecracking trap builder this time, but a kid with a clear wound, split parents, the awkwardness of being shuffled between homes, and the sharp need to be seen and taken seriously. That combination gives him a deceptively simple arc. His cleverness isn't only for prankish victory, it becomes an anxious, earnest tool for protecting a fragile version of home. You watch him move from defensive, frustrated kid to someone who consciously chooses responsibility. His growth is shown in small behavioral beats, planning rather than panicking, improvising with empathy rather than lashing out, using traps to shield people rather than simply to humiliate intruders, and those choices make him feel like more than a slapstick machine. The adults orbiting him are written as foils that reveal different adult failures and possibilities. Kevin's father comes across as distracted and, at first, a little smug about new comforts. He underestimates the emotional cost to his son, which fuels the movie's tension. The film uses that underestimation to stage a soft moral education. Adult priorities are gently challenged by the kid who actually sees what matters. The father doesn't undergo a gut-wrenching transformation so much as a corrective moment, a recognition that restores some balance and forces grown-ups to answer for their inattention. The father's romantic partner functions as a picturesque antagonist of manners and status, someone whose taste for control and image-making amplifies Kevin's outsider feeling, and she's less about being evil and more about being an obstacle to emotional truth. Her arc, if there is one, is subtle and mostly indirect, revealed when the story's chaos forces her to face disorders she can't buy or gloss over. The household adults and staff are excellent supporting players for tone. They either compound Kevin's isolation by not listening, or they provide comic texture, and they rarely need deep arcs because their job is to make Kevin's choices look necessary and clever. Then there are the villains, who exist on purpose as broad, physical foils, greedy, stubborn, and comically inept. They don't grow, they're not meant to. Their motivation is simple and external: loot, mischief, comic menace, which gives Kevin room to shine. The film deliberately keeps them flat so the contrast between youthful resourcefulness and adult foolishness reads clearly. The villain's predictability amplifies Kevin's ingenuity and the film's giddy sense of comeuppance. Relationships are where the movie does its lightest emotional heavy lifting. The most interesting dynamic is not a romance or a big reconciliation speech, but a series of small reckonings. A look exchanged when a parent realizes their child was right, a moment when a supposed protector is revealed to be fallible, a scene where Kevin's traps are less about winning and more about proving a point. These moments add an oddly tender undercurrent to the slapstick. The comedy punctures the adult's complacency and forces recognition. Motivations are kept clear and archetypal. Kevin wants safety and family coherence. The adults want comfort, love, or social validation. The burglars want profit, but the way the film lets Kevin's inner needs color his external actions gives his character texture. He's not merely inventive for spectacle. He's inventive because he's trying to belong, to tilt the adult's view back toward him. That emotional root is what makes his successes feel earned rather than merely cartoonish. The weaker side of the character work is that many secondary players exist mainly to push the plot forward. Siblings, neighbors, and some parent figures are shorthand for what Kevin has to win back, rather than fully rounded people with private arcs. That's a practical choice. The film's runtime and its commitment to set-piece comedy mean there isn't room for everyone to evolve. Still, the storytelling smartly concentrates depth where it matters. Kevin and his immediate emotional opponents, which keeps the audience invested without overcomplicating the tone. In short, the film mixes sincere little beats of growth with broad, joyfully exaggerated antagonists. The protagonist gets real, human development tied to family and agency, the adults are corrected rather than remade, and the villains remain gloriously static so the kid's cleverness can keep staging delightful reversals. The performances in Home Alone 4 are where the movie both tries to honor the legacy of the earlier films and carve out its own space, and the results are fascinating to watch. At the center is Mike Weinberg as Kevin, stepping into shoes that were already iconic thanks to Macaulay Culkin. What works about his performance is that he doesn't try to mimic the original. Instead, he brings a slightly softer, more eager energy to Kevin. He's cheeky, mischievous, and full of wide-eyed confidence, but also conveys the sadness of a kid caught in the middle of a broken family. His delivery during the more comedic moments, especially when he's outsmarting the crooks, carries the right spark of glee, while his quieter scenes when he longs for his parents to reconcile show a genuine vulnerability. That balance gives his Kevin a distinct flavor, even if he's younger and less sardonic than Culkin's version. French Stewart as Marv is another big swing in the film's cast. He doesn't replicate Daniel Stern's gangly, hapless energy but instead creates a sillier, more exaggerated version of the character. His physical comedy is broad, cartoonish, and deliberately over the top. You can tell he's leaning into slapstick with a wink, and it keeps the tone light. His scenes with Missi Pyle, who plays Vera, are some of the film's comic highlights. Pyle gives Vera a brash, wild edge that plays beautifully against Stewart's fumbling. She clearly knows she's in a family comedy and relishes every pratfall, scream, and exaggerated reaction. Together, they create a dynamic that doesn't replace the original Wet Bandits but builds a fresh comic duo in their own right. Jason Begg as Kevin's father, Peter, brings a gruffness and seriousness that contrasts sharply with the more comedic players. His performance grounds the adult side of the story, showing the distracted and flawed parent who slowly wakes up to what his son needs. Begg's acting isn't flashy, but his subtle shifts, from dismissive to proud, help make the emotional payoff feel believable. Opposite him, Claire Carey as Kate doesn't get as much screen time, but she still captures the maternal warmth and concern audiences expect from Kevin's mom. Even in limited scenes, she reminds us of the original family core and adds a layer of familiarity. Joanna Going as Natalie, the glamorous girlfriend, leans into her role as the polished foil to Kevin. She plays Natalie with a calculated elegance that tilts into coldness, making it easy for the audience to root against her. She doesn't need to be over the top. Her clipped delivery and subtle disdain for Kevin carry the right bite, and when her character's veneer starts to crack under the chaos of Kevin's traps, Going handles the shift with sharp comedic timing. Supporting performances also add flavor. Erick Avari as Prescott the butler is a standout in his own right, giving the character a theatrical, slightly mysterious presence. His dry, measured line delivery makes him both suspicious and funny, and he adds texture to the house dynamic. Barbara Babcock as Mrs. Hess, meanwhile, provides a touch of eccentric comic relief that brightens the mansion scenes even further. What ties all these performances together is a shared commitment to tone. Every actor seems to understand they are in a broad family comedy where physicality, timing, and exaggerated reactions matter as much as emotional depth. Yet within that heightened world, some actors manage to sneak in authentic feeling, Weinberg with his sincerity, Begg with his softened arc, Going with her icy charm, and those small doses of honesty help anchor the story amidst the slapstick. The chemistry between the crooks, the butler, and Kevin drives the humor, while the fractured family dynamic drives the emotion, and both are held together by performances that, even when uneven, are always entertaining to watch. The cinematography in Home Alone 4 works less like a showcase for flashy visuals and more like a toolkit designed to keep the comedy clear, the mansion setting impressive, and Kevin's point of view at the center of the story. The camera angles are chosen with precision to make sure every gag lands, every trap is readable, and every character interaction conveys its emotional weight. One of the clever tricks used throughout is scale. Low-angle shots of Kevin make him appear more heroic in moments when he's plotting or standing up to the crooks, while high-angle shots remind us of his vulnerability, especially in the family scenes where he's small and overlooked in adult conversations. That balance of angles gives Kevin's journey a visual arc that mirrors his emotional one. Lighting plays a huge role in establishing mood. In the warm, family-centered moments, Kevin talking with his mom or holding on to the hope of his parents' reconciliation, the lighting is softer, with warmer tones that feel nostalgic and comforting. Contrast that with the cold, more sterile lighting in Natalie's mansion, where glossy surfaces and cooler palettes reflect not only wealth but also Kevin's sense of alienation in a house that doesn't quite feel like home. When danger creeps in, like when Marv and Vera attempt to infiltrate, the cinematography adjusts subtly, using more shadows, dimmer environments, and sharper contrasts. It's not horror lighting, but just enough tension is created to make the mansion feel unsafe before Kevin reclaims it with his trap. Framing is where the cinematography really shines in its service of comedy. Wide shots are often used to show the geography of a room before a trap is set off, ensuring the audience understands exactly what's about to happen and can fully enjoy the payoff. When a trap is sprung, quick cuts to close-ups of the villains' faces heighten the slapstick, turning every fall, slip, or collision into a punchline. The framing also exaggerates the chaos by sometimes keeping Kevin in the corner of a shot, calmly watching his work unfold while the crooks flail across the screen. This juxtaposition, calm mastermind versus flustered victim, is one of the running visual gags that keeps the comedy sharp. There are visually striking moments sprinkled throughout that elevate the TV movie look. For instance, the use of reflections in the mansion's polished floors and grand mirrors creates a sense of space that Kevin cleverly exploits in his trap. Shots of sprawling staircases and oversized hallways make the house itself feel like a character, one that's both a labyrinth and a playground. A particularly memorable moment comes when Kevin rigs the plumbing. The camera captures the sudden spray of water in a wide, gleaming shot that transforms the pristine luxury of the mansion into a chaotic mess, visually underlining the theme of a child reclaiming control in an adult world. The cinematography is also careful about pacing tension. Before a trap is sprung, the camera sometimes lingers in medium shots on Kevin setting up his contraptions, letting the audience anticipate the chaos to come. Then, when the villains step into the frame, the composition tightens, shifting to their clumsy movements so the eventual hit or fall feels more explosive. The rhythm of how shots are framed and cut becomes a kind of dance between anticipation and payoff, which is why even predictable pratfalls still manage to land with comic energy. What makes the cinematography effective is that it never tries to overshadow the story with grand artistic flourishes. Instead, it supports the film's dual goals: keep the humor visually legible and heighten the contrast between the emotional family drama and the slapstick battle inside the mansion. Through its angles, lighting, and framing, the cinematography creates a playful atmosphere where comedy thrives, tension sneaks in just enough to raise the stakes, and even moments of beauty peek through in the symmetry of the grand house being turned upside down by a clever kid. The editing in Home Alone 4 is the movie's secret metronome. It decides when you grin, when you gasp, and when you get to catch your breath, and it does so by switching tempos like a DJ spinning between two very different playlists, one for slapstick mayhem and one for family feeling. In the trap-heavy sequences, the cuts are tight and purposeful. An establishing wide shows the geography so the next beat will read, a quick cut to a prop or a foot slipping sells cause and effect, and then a reaction close-up lets the comedy land. That triad, establish, detail, react, repeats like a drumbeat and keeps physical gags crystal clear. The editor leans on classical continuity to preserve spatial logic. You always know where the banana peel sits and how it connects to the staircase fall, but spices it with rhythmic staccato edits during pratfalls so the sequence builds like a little crescendo, each new cut adding a layer of absurdity until the payoff. For Kevin's planning montages, the film uses compact assembly sequences, a handful of shots compressed into a montage that feels efficient and clever rather than rushed, which both economizes runtime and lets the audience enjoy the blueprint pleasure of seeing a plan come together. Cross-cutting is another favorite tool. Alternating between Kevin setting a trap and the villains blundering toward it creates suspense and a silly dramatic irony. We see the danger they don't. And at the climax, those parallel streams collide with satisfying timing because the editing has already established expectation. When the movie wants you to care, the editor loosens the pace. Longer takes, softer cuts, and fewer visual punches allow quieter beats to breathe and give performances room to register emotional smallness. Kevin's loneliness or a parent's dawning guilt feel more believable because the camera and cut cadence slow down to listen. Sound and music are married to the cut rhythm too. Edits often land on musical hits or drops into silence to amplify a gag or a tender pause, which makes the editing feel choreographic rather than mechanical. Practical constraints of the production show up in smart ways. Coverage may be economical, so the cutback to reaction shots or to a single well-chosen insert is used to mask gaps and maintain momentum, and that economy sometimes produces a pleasantly lean comic precision. There are trade-offs. Some expositional stretches drag when scenes rely on adults talking in static setups, and occasionally an emotional resolution gets compressed. The film will snap from chaos to reconciliation without the breathing room you might want, which can make a few payoffs feel telegraphed rather than earned. But those slow patches are balanced by sequences where the editor deliberately stretches out a single beat, holding a reaction a fraction longer to let laughter swell, or delaying a smash by a frame to maximize surprise, and those tiny timing choices are where the comedy earns its smiles. Overall, the rhythm is roller coaster intentional. Fast, playful bursts to deliver physical comedy, mid-tempo interludes to reset and reveal, and slow, softer moments to anchor the kid's emotional arc. The result is an editing strategy that prioritizes clarity and timing above flash, knowing that in a movie built on pratfalls and parent-child beats, the right cut at the right fraction of a second is the difference between a gag that lands and one that slips away. The soundtrack and score of Home Alone 4 work like the invisible hand guiding the audience's emotions, telling you when to laugh, when to feel suspense, and when to lean into the more sentimental undertones of Kevin's story. The film borrows from the tradition set by the earlier entries, where music was almost another character, punctuating every slip, fall, or pratfall with a perfectly timed flourish. The composers know that in a movie so heavily reliant on slapstick, silence alone won't sell the gag. You need a quick sting of strings, a comedic brass note, or a whimsical woodwind flourish to make the moment land. That musical punctuation is scattered everywhere, almost like a cartoon score, and it helps transform ordinary household antics into grand comic set pieces. One of the most memorable aspects of the score is how it reinterprets some of the tonal cues that John Williams originally established in the franchise. The whimsical, mischievous cues return in lighter form, reminding the audience that Kevin's creativity is meant to be celebrated rather than feared. Whenever Kevin starts planning or setting traps, you can hear playful instrumentation creep in. Light strings, chimes, and flutes that build anticipation, letting the audience in on the secret before the villains have any clue what's coming. The moment the traps are triggered, the score pivots to bold bursts of brass and percussion, making each gag feel bigger than life. It's less about realism and more about rhythm. The sound is choreographed to the action, making the comedy sharper. But the music isn't only about comedy. In family-centered scenes, the score softens into more sentimental territory, often with gentle piano or warm orchestral sweep. These moments are designed to pull the audience back into Kevin's emotional world, where the chaos of the mansion is balanced by his longing for family unity. The shift in instrumentation is subtle but effective, from playful mischief to heartstring-tugging warmth, and it ensures that the audience doesn't lose sight of the emotional core beneath the pratfalls. There are also clever uses of silence throughout. Before a trap goes off, the score sometimes cuts away, leaving just the sound of footsteps, creaking doors, or the thieves whispering. That breath of quiet creates tension, making the eventual burst of comedic music feel like a release. The rhythm between silence and sound becomes a key part of the pacing. The audience is lulled into expectation, then jolted into laughter. Without those silences, the film would risk being noisy wall to wall. Instead, the contrast keeps viewers engaged and makes every musical sting feel earned. The recurring motifs help tie the film together. Mischief themes accompany Kevin's scheming, bumbling motifs signal the arrival of Marv and Vera, and warmer themes return whenever family reconciliation is on the horizon. It isn't a sweeping, unforgettable score in the sense of grand cinema, but it is effective in creating continuity and guiding the viewer's feelings without distraction. The blending of comic orchestration with softer family melodies mirrors the movie's own balance between slapstick fun and emotional undercurrent. What makes the soundtrack and score so important here is how they function as the connective tissue between wildly different tones. The music makes the pratfalls feel like playful spectacle instead of cruelty. It underscores Kevin's emotional growth without overplaying sentimentality, and it gives the mansion a musical identity that makes it feel alive and unpredictable. The score never overwhelms, but it's always present, shaping the film's atmosphere and rhythm with an invisible hand that tells the audience exactly how to feel, moment by moment. The director of Home Alone 4 acts like an architect of tone more than a showy stylist. Every choice, from how a gag is framed to how a quiet family moment is paced, is aimed at balancing broad physical comedy with just enough warmth to keep the emotional thread intact. Visually, the film favors contrast. Wide, roomy compositions to sell the mansion's scale and the possibilities for Rube Goldberg-style traps, and tighter medium and close-up shots to sell Kevin's expressions and scheming. That contrast does two things at once. It makes the house feel like a playground full of potential instruments of mayhem, and it keeps the viewer tightly aligned with Kevin's point of view when the scene needs to feel immediate or intimate. The camera choices during trap sequences are pragmatic and purposeful. You'll often get an establishing wide so you can see the geography of a trap, then a cut to reaction close-ups to sell the hurt/comic payoff, and the director times those cuts to preserve the physical logic. Pratfalls still need to read in space, so blocking and staging are prioritized over flashy camera move. Pacing is handled like a series of musical movements. Quick, staccato editing in the set pieces to build momentum and laughter, then longer, slower beats for the emotional scenes that remind us why Kevin's fight matters. Sometimes that rhythm feels episodic: trap, aftermath, adult bickering, new trap, but it's a deliberate choice to let the comic set pieces breathe rather than compressing everything into an adrenaline rush. Performance direction leans into theatricality. Actors playing crooks are encouraged to be broad and cartoonish so their physicality becomes a foil for Kevin's cleverness, while the adult players are played with more grounded beats so their small shifts in expression register as genuine growth when they finally notice Kevin. Stylistically, the director uses production design and lighting as shorthand: warm, cozy palettes for family spaces, slightly cooler or more polished tones for the girlfriend's mansion interiors, which subtly cues the audience about emotional safety versus alienation without needing expository dialogue. Sound and music are timed as part of the direction. Percussive whack cues, comedic stingers, and orchestral swells are woven into the edit to heighten punches and soften transitions into tender moments, so a trap landing reads as cathartic rather than mean-spirited. There's also an economy to the filmmaking because of the film's TV-movie origins. Large set pieces get inventive solutions rather than expensive spectacle. The director stages complicated beats so they can be shot in a few practical setups, using props, camera positioning, and actor choreography to sell complexity. In terms of narrative vision, the director keeps the story child-centered. Camera placement, pacing, and cut choices consistently privilege Kevin's agency, making the audience complicit in his problem-solving. Small directorial flourishes. A low-angle shot to make Kevin briefly heroic, a quick cut to a supposedly safe adult who's oblivious, or a lingering handheld moment when Kevin feels alone, underline emotional shifts without calling attention to themselves. The movie's tone is carefully moderated so slapstick never fully overwhelms the sentimental beats. When the family scenes need a gentler touch, the director pulls back camera motion and lets performances carry the weight. The trade-offs show up too. Because the director must juggle comedy, heart, and budget, some sequences land purer as cartoons while others aim for sincerity and occasionally wobble between the two. But overall, the direction functions as a steady helm that keeps the film recognizable in the Home Alone tradition, a crafted mix of visual clarity for physical comedy, sympathetic performance coaching for its young lead, smart use of production design and sound to set emotional cues, and an editing rhythm that alternates between the snap of a gag and the pause of an emotional beat. Underneath the banana peel choreography and the ping-and-wax slapstick, Home Alone 4 is quietly busy weaving a handful of surprisingly clear themes. Some the movie leans into with charm, some it treats like garnish, and each one helps explain why a film full of pratfalls still wants you to leave with a little warmth in your chest. The loudest theme is home and belonging. The movie keeps returning to the idea that home is less about square footage and more about attention, memory, and emotional availability. The mansion's gleaming rooms look impressive on paper but feel hollow to Kevin. His booby traps are less revenge than a kid's way of resecuring the territory where he feels recognized. That contrast, cold polished surfaces versus messy, lived-in loyalty, shows up visually, narratively, and emotionally, making every ruined rug or flooded hallway read like a small victory for human connection over social polish. Closely tied to that is the film's focus on childhood agency. Kevin isn't just a prankster, he's the story's moral architect. By giving him competence, the movie stages a satisfying fantasy, a child who can fix grown-up mistakes. That fantasy is delivered through invention and ingenuity. Each trap is a creative rebuttal to adult complacency, and it frames resourcefulness as a kind of ethical power. The film doesn't pretend the tricks are textbook pedagogy. It treats them as comic justice, and in doing so it asks the viewer to cheer for a kid who takes fate into his own hands. The moral texture here is cartoonish but emotionally real. Agency matters because being seen matters. A second adult-facing theme is responsibility versus distraction. The adults in the movie are not villains so much as distracted figures whose choices create the emotional opening Kevin must fill. The father's preoccupation with new comforts and the glamorous partner's emphasis on image work together to show how easily adults can mistake convenience for care. The film stages small reckonings rather than wrenching transformations. Adults get nudged toward awareness rather than completely remade, and that restraint keeps the tone gentle while still making the point that attention is the currency of family. Class and image play quietly through the script as well. The mansion isn't only a playground for set pieces, it's a symbol of what status can't buy. The movie toys with the idea that wealth offers spectacle and gadgets but not necessarily warmth, and Kevin's hijinks expose the performative fragility of a house that looks perfect until it's turned upside down. That critique isn't heavy-handed, it's delivered via puddles, ruined centerpieces, and the comedic fall of people who assumed polish could substitute for presence. Trust and betrayal get a surprisingly textured airing when an insider connection complicates the break-in plot. That plot beat does two things. It raises the stakes in plot terms, the home is compromised from within, and it gives the film a small moral puzzle. The threat isn't only external, which makes Kevin's fight feel less like cartoon warfare and more like a test of whom to believe. The theme here is about discernment. Childhood isn't just about physical courage, it's about learning whom to rely on and when adults are fallible. The film also flirts with ideas about identity and maturation. Kevin starts as reactive and ends with a clearer sense of purpose. That arc is modest but recognizable. Inventiveness becomes responsibility, mischief becomes protection, and the child's need to be noticed becomes an argument for parental care. It's not a dramatic coming of age in the literary sense, but it's a tidy emotional progression that tracks with the film's family-centered aims. A recurring subtheme is poetic justice versus cruelty. The movie stages humiliations for the crooks that are giddy and mostly bodily comic. The score and editing constantly signal that these are meant to be cathartic, not vicious. That tonal choice protects the film from feeling mean-spirited, but it also raises a small ethical question. When do comeuppance gags become too easy? The filmmakers avoid that pitfall by keeping the crooks broad and cartoonish. Because they're exaggerated wrongdoers rather than nuanced humans, the audience is invited to enjoy the slapstick without moral discomfort. There are moments where the themes feel scaffolded rather than fully excavated. Divorce and blended family anxiety are present as real emotional material, but the film treats them lightly, enough to give Kevin motivation, not enough to probe the messy long-term consequences. That means some thematic payoffs can read tidy or slightly rushed. Reconciliation and clarity arrive on sitcom timings, which keeps the movie family-friendly but prevents deeper rumination. Still, given the film's goals, the choice to favor repair over grief is consistent with the franchise's comforting instincts. Finally, nostalgia and franchise legacy are themselves meta-themes. The movie trades on a shared cultural memory of Home Alone, the traps, the bumbling burglars, the triumphant kid, and by echoing those motifs it invites viewers into an intergenerational conversation about childhood, humor, and what safety means. That meta layer helps the film feel like part of a tradition, and it uses expectation to subvert and then satisfy it. You come for the pratfalls, you leave with a small lesson about what actually makes a house a home. When it comes to visual effects and CGI in Home Alone 4, the movie sits at an interesting crossroad between old-school physical comedy and the early 2000s experimentation with digital tools. The original Home Alone films leaned heavily on practical stunts, slapstick timing, and real-world setups that gave every trap a tactile, almost gritty feel. You could see the paint can swinging, the icy steps glistening, or the iron falling, and part of the humor came from the audience recognizing how physical and dangerous those pranks look. By contrast, Home Alone 4 brings in a few moments where visual effects, both practical and digital, have to work together to sell the gags, and the result is a bit uneven, sometimes charming, sometimes distracting. Practical effects remain the backbone of the film's comedic set pieces. When Kevin rigs up his new traps inside the mansion, you still get the joy of real-world props doing absurd damage. Water flooding into elegant hallways, heavy objects teetering just long enough for you to anticipate the fall, and furniture transforming into elaborate obstacles. These effects, when kept physical, feel immediate and satisfying. A door slamming in someone's face, a slippery surface sending a villain tumbling, or a heavy gadget swinging overhead have that visceral quality that makes the pratfall land with a thud you almost feel yourself. But the early 2000s were also an era where CGI was being experimented with in comedies, and Home Alone 4 doesn't resist the temptation to dabble. Certain sequences rely on digital embellishments to exaggerate the chaos, a splash of water that looks a bit too clean, a fall that feels smoothed out with computer work, or an over-the-top gag that couldn't have been staged safely without digital intervention. These touches are meant to heighten the humor but sometimes undercut the believability. The charm of a Home Alone trap comes from its "what if this actually happened" feel, and when CGI sneaks in, the realism gets softened into cartoon physics. That shift can be fun, but it also risks breaking the immersive spell for viewers who love the grittier slapstick of the earlier films. Interestingly, the film's production design helps mask some of the weaker digital work. The mansion setting is large, ornate, and full of shiny surfaces that naturally exaggerate light and motion, making it easier to blend CGI water splashes or sparks with the environment. The wide framing of some trap sequences also lets digital effects hide in the chaos. When three things are breaking at once, the audience doesn't have time to scrutinize which of them is practical and which is animated. The balance between practical and digital is most noticeable in the villain's reactions. Practical makeup, wigs askew, soot-on faces, or costumes torn by real stunt work always feel more satisfying than digital enhancements. When CGI tries to emphasize the impact, like a fall that looks too weightless, the comedy can feel less painful and therefore less funny. The magic of slapstick is that it looks like it hurts while still being silly, and practical effects capture that line more convincingly. Overall, the film uses visual effects as a supplement rather than a foundation. Practical props and stunts remain the heart of the comedy, while CGI occasionally steps in to polish or exaggerate what couldn't be achieved safely. Sometimes that blend works seamlessly, creating a heightened version of reality where Kevin's traps feel inventive and wild, but still rooted in the physical world. At other times the digital gloss peeks through, reminding you that you're watching a staged gag rather than a plausible prank. For a family comedy in 2002, it was a natural experiment, pushing the boundaries of what Home Alone traps could look like, while still leaning on the proven power of slipping, falling, crashing, and the timeless satisfaction of a villain getting exactly what they deserve. The set design and locations in Home Alone 4 do more than provide backdrops. They're active players in the film's jokes and emotional argument, a carefully staged playground where every room can be weapon, refuge, or clue to who belongs there. The movie sets up a clear visual language by contrasting the cluttered, lived-in warmth of the McCallister world with the polished, echoing geometry of the wealthy girlfriend's mansion, and that contrast instantly tells you which spaces nurture and which merely impress. The mansion is designed like a Rube Goldberg factory of opportunities. Long corridors, sweeping staircases, high ceilings, glossy floors, and ornate fixtures that read as obstacles and props at once, while smaller domestic rooms, kitchens, basements, studies, are packed with everyday items that production design smartly repurposes for comedy, turning lamps, pans, loose rugs, plumbing, and even furniture joints into practical trap components that feel believable because they're grounded in tactile detail. Attention to dressing, scuffed upholstery, slightly askew picture frames, fingerprints on glass, a child's toy left half hidden, makes the inhabited spaces feel real and gives Kevin reasons to improvise. Conversely, the mansion's perfection, polished banisters, immaculate centerpieces, mirrored surfaces, makes its eventual chaos visually satisfying and thematically sharp, a visual punchline that says, "Status can be toppled." The designers also think like stunt coordinators. Sets are modular where necessary so traps can be reset and shot from multiple angles, seams and false backs conceal safety rigs, and props are rigged to read well on camera while keeping actors safe, which allows pratfalls to land with visceral impact rather than feeling digital or fake. Seasonal dressing, twinkling lights, wreaths, a tree or two isn't just festive frosting. It's used to frame emotional beats and to hide or reveal tools of mischief. An ornament becomes a distraction, garland masks trip lines, so production design participates in the storytelling economy. Location choices amplify scale and tone. Exteriors and establishing shots sell the lifestyle divide, while interiors are carefully color-coded so warm, matte textures accompany family intimacy and high-gloss, reflective palettes emphasize alienation and spectacle. Even small recurring motifs. The grand staircase, a long hallway that becomes a gauntlet, a cramped utility room that converts into a booby-trap workshop, function like mini-characters, each with predictable affordances directors and editors exploit for rhythm and surprise. Practically speaking, the balance between on-location sets and soundstage builds is used to control continuity and camera movement. Expansive sets give freedom for wide blocking that lets the audience read spatial logic, while tighter, controlled spaces keep emotional close-ups intimate. All told, the production design doesn't just dress scenes. It choreographs them, supplying the film with visual jokes, thematic contrast, and a believable environment that makes Kevin's ingenuity feel plausible and the eventual upheaval feel earned rather than arbitrary. The dialogue and script in Home Alone 4 walk a very fine line between slapstick setup and family melodrama, and you can almost hear the tug-of-war between wanting to sound like a true successor to the original films and wanting to cater to a new audience of early 2000s family television. The words given to Kevin often lean toward quick, cheeky one-liners, a mix of childlike naivety and exaggerated cleverness, because part of the fun of Home Alone is that a kid's voice gets to flip the hierarchy of power. His dialogue isn't Shakespearean wit, but it's designed for punch, rhythm, and timing. When he mocks the villain's mid-chase or delivers a triumphant retort after a trap springs, it lands not because the line itself is groundbreaking but because it's perfectly timed with chaos swirling around him. That marriage of physical gag and verbal jab is where the script feels most alive. The villain's dialogue is another key part of the comedic machine. They bluster, argue, and bicker in exaggerated tones, repeating insults and half-baked plans that show us how incompetent they are. Their words are less about advancing plot than about undercutting themselves. Every time they claim, "This time we'll outsmart him," their phrasing is so overconfident and silly that you're already anticipating the pratfall that proves them wrong. Their exchanges are intentionally repetitive, built to create a rhythm where their stupidity becomes its own joke. Where the script occasionally tries to stretch is in the family drama scenes. These moments lean into emotional weight, giving Kevin lines about loneliness, trust, and wanting to be heard. Here, the words aim at sincerity rather than comedy, but sometimes they come across as too neat, as though the screenwriters were wrapping complex issues like divorce and blended families into kid-friendly soundbite. A scene where Kevin pleads to be believed or tries to point out what's missing in his family carries the heart of the story, but the phrasing tends to favor clarity over depth, which makes it resonate more with younger viewers than with adults craving subtlety. That said, these moments are important tonal counterweights. Without them the movie would just be pratfalls, and with them it gains at least a sketch of emotional texture. Sharp wit comes mostly from situational banter rather than standalone quote. The script often layers in ironic contrasts, a villain boasting right before slipping, or an adult making a claim that the next shot undercuts visually, so the dialogue becomes part of the gag rather than the punchline itself. This interplay between words and action is the franchise's calling card, and even when the writing falters, the editing and performances rescue it by turning flat lines into comic beat. There are attempts at memorable lines, though few rise to the cultural immortality of the original, "Keep the change, you filthy animal." Still, the script sprinkles catchphrase-style retorts and playful taunts designed to stick in younger viewers' heads, often tied to Kevin's inventive traps or his small victories. These are engineered for repetition and recall, even if they don't have the same grit or bite as the early films. Ultimately, the dialogue functions like connective tissue between set pieces, quick enough to set up the joke, emotional enough to keep Kevin sympathetic, and broad enough to keep the villains laughable. It's not aiming for layered monologues or quiet subtext. It's aiming for rhythm, bounce, and cartoonish exaggeration. The script succeeds most when words echo or amplify the physical comedy, and it stumbles when it leans too hard on generic family sentiment. But even in its weaker moments, the dialogue is delivered with an energy that keeps the audience engaged, ensuring that every exchange pushes toward either a laugh, a trap, or a reminder that, underneath the chaos, this is still a story about a kid fighting to be noticed and loved. Home Alone 4 is a film that knows exactly what sandbox it's playing in. Family comedy with a streak of slapstick action and just enough holiday drama to tie it together. The franchise itself is practically its own genre at this point, so the fourth installment doesn't reinvent the wheel. It leans heavily on the conventions that made the first two films iconic. You still get the mischievous kid, the bumbling villains, the elaborate traps, and the ultimate message about family bonds. But what's interesting is how it plays with those familiar beats inside a new setting, experimenting in small ways while relying on the comfort of formula. As a family comedy, it delivers on the slapstick front. The pratfalls are exaggerated, the villains are cartoonishly unlucky, and Kevin's clever one-ups keep the pace light and breezy. These elements are pure genre convention, the kind of humor where the audience laughs not because the pain looks real, but because it's exaggerated into absurdity. The movie knows its young viewers want to see the bad guys slip, crash, burn, and bumble, so it delivers set pieces designed like mini action comedy sketches. This is where the genre execution is at its strongest. No matter how familiar the formula, slapstick never really goes out of style when staged with enough energy. On the action and suspense side, the film balances tension with humor in predictable but effective ways. The setup of Kevin versus the villains always comes with that teasing sense of, when will the trap spring? The cross-cutting between Kevin preparing and the burglars stumbling into danger borrows conventions from action thrillers, but softened with comedic timing. The suspense is never too sharp, never meant to truly frighten, but it keeps kids perched with anticipation. This is a clever use of genre blending, taking the bones of a heist or siege movie but reshaping them into a playground of joke. Drama enters the equation through Kevin's family situation, and here the execution is more uneven. The movie wants to tug at heartstrings with themes of divorce, remarriage, and trust, but because it has to stay in family-friendly territory, it addresses those issues in broad strokes. The dramatic beats are conventional. A child feels unheard, parents realize they need to listen, misunderstandings lead to growth, and while they provide emotional grounding, they don't break new ground. They're clichés, but they're functional clichés, the kind of storytelling shorthand that ensures kids understand the stakes while adults nod knowingly at the familiar patterns. As for fresh ideas, the mansion setting is the movie's biggest swing. Unlike the suburban home of the first films, this setting allows for larger, more elaborate trap sequences and a heightened sense of scale. The change in environment also adds a layer of satire, poking fun at wealth and showing how status symbols crumble under the weight of Kevin's inventiveness. This is a refreshing twist within the genre formula, proving that even when the story hits familiar beats, the playground can look and feel new. The balance between genres is sometimes clunky though. Comedy and action dominate, while drama often feels rushed, folded into quick conversations or neatly tied-up resolutions. This creates a rhythm where the emotional core plays second fiddle to the spectacle, which makes sense for a family comedy but leaves the dramatic threads undercooked. Still, that imbalance doesn't ruin the fun. The film knows its primary job is to entertain, and it executes on the comedy-action fusion well enough that viewers forgive the thinness of the drama. In the end, Home Alone 4 executes its genre the way a magician repeats a trick you've already seen. The surprise is gone, but the performance can still charm when the timing and showmanship are right. It doesn't subvert much, but it uses the conventions of slapstick, family comedy, and light holiday drama with enough enthusiasm to keep the ride engaging, even if the map was drawn a decade earlier. Home Alone 4 doesn't wear the clothes of a social satire, but tucked beneath its pratfalls and punchlines are some surprisingly pointed cultural signals that reflect the early 2000s moment in which it was made. Unlike the first two films, which were more about suburban normalcy turned chaotic, this installment shifts its focus to the world of wealth, status, and family restructuring, and that shift itself is a kind of commentary on how culture was changing. The gleaming mansion where most of the story unfolds isn't just a backdrop for comedy, it's a stage that critiques privilege and excess. Every chandelier that shatters, every expensive vase that tips, and every immaculately polished staircase that turns into a slip hazard is essentially a running joke at the expense of upper-class perfection. The film may not spell it out, but it's clear that comfort and wealth are hollow without warmth, and Kevin's antics tear down the facade of status one trap at a time. The family dynamics also reflect cultural anxieties of the time. By 2002, divorce and blended families were becoming far more common in mainstream media, and Home Alone 4 leans right into that reality. Kevin's struggle isn't just against burglars. It's against the instability of shifting households, new parental partners, and the fear of being lost in the shuffle. For kids in the audience, this theme gave voice to a cultural shift that wasn't often represented so directly in lighthearted comedies. For adults, it highlighted the uncomfortable but increasingly familiar challenges of co-parenting and divided homes. The movie handles this with broad strokes rather than nuance, but its very presence shows how the franchise was adjusting to reflect real-world social changes rather than ignoring them. Trust and betrayal also carry a cultural echo. The inclusion of a traitor within the household, someone supposed to be loyal who secretly undermines the family, can be read as a faint reflection of a post-9/11 world, where concerns about hidden dangers, infiltration, and the need for vigilance were part of the cultural atmosphere. While the movie never addresses politics outright, its narrative structure taps into that anxiety in a family-friendly, exaggerated way, turning national unease into a simple lesson about whom you can trust. The villains themselves, cartoonish though they are, also embody social commentary in miniature. They are driven not by survival or need but by greed, obsession, and incompetence. Their failures underline a simple cultural jab. Those who try to take shortcuts or live off other people's hard work are destined to fail, especially when pitted against resourcefulness and creativity. It's a timeless moral, but framed in a way that resonates with broader societal critiques of selfishness and exploitation. Even the film's lighter beats carry cultural subtext. The use of technology in Kevin's traps, for instance, reflects the early 2000s fascination with gadgets and smart living. The mansion's modern conveniences become tools of chaos rather than control, a subtle wink at how technology can't replace clever thinking or genuine human connection. At the same time, the holiday setting ensures that beneath the chaos, the cultural push for family unity during the season still dominates, reinforcing traditions even as it acknowledges the shifting structure of modern households. Of course, not all of the commentary is graceful. Some of the class contrasts lean toward caricature, with wealth portrayed in such an exaggerated way that it borders on parody. The family issues, though relevant, are wrapped up too neatly, underplaying the complexity of divorce and blended family struggles. Yet even in this simplification, the film reveals what mainstream culture was ready to talk about, not the deep wounds of broken families, but the possibility of repair, optimism, and laughter in the middle of change. In this way, Home Alone 4 serves as a kind of cultural time capsule. It mirrors early 2000s concerns with wealth, fractured families, and shifting social trust, all packaged inside a slapstick comedy that never openly admits it's making commentary. Instead, the film lets its traps, settings, and character conflicts quietly do the talking, offering viewers more than just pratfalls if they're willing to look between the gags. Audience engagement with Home Alone 4 is a curious thing, because it operates on two different levels depending on who's watching. For younger viewers, the slapstick chaos is the main hook. Kids don't care about the logistics of blended families or the plausibility of a villain's plan. They care about watching Kevin outsmart adults with an arsenal of ridiculous trap. Every pratfall, every spill down a staircase, and every over-the-top scream from the burglars is designed to pull giggles and belly laughs. For that age group, the film works like a sugar rush. Fast, funny, and messy in all the ways they crave. For adults, though, the engagement is more complicated. Some will roll their eyes at the recycled formula and weaker execution compared to the first two classics, but others may find themselves chuckling in spite of it all, drawn in by nostalgia. There's something about the idea of a clever kid outwitting bumbling adults that never really loses its charm, even if the setup feels familiar. Parents watching with their kids may find themselves unexpectedly invested not just in the traps, but in Kevin's situation, his tug-of-war between two households and his yearning for stability. That emotional thread, though simplified, can resonate with families going through similar transitions, making the film more than just background noise. The emotional engagement also spikes in moments where Kevin's loneliness slips through. Beneath the comedic surface, there's a very real pang of sympathy when he's caught between his parents' separate worlds. For viewers who have lived through divorce or shifting family dynamics, those moments can stir something deeper, offering a point of connection amid the slapstick mayhem. It's a surprising way the film sneaks in a little more heart than it initially seems to promise. The laughter is definitely engineered, but it works best in group settings. This isn't the kind of movie most people watch alone for introspection. It's a film that thrives on shared reactions. A living room filled with kids shouting at the screen as the bad guys step into yet another trap, or adults groaning at a cheesy one-liner is exactly the environment where Home Alone 4 delivers the most. It invites audiences not just to watch, but to participate, guessing what trick Kevin will pull next, wincing at a hard fall, or collectively sighing when family conflict reaches its sugary resolution. Does it inspire deep reflection? Probably not in the way a prestige drama might, but it does spark conversation in its own way. Parents might talk with kids about family, about resilience, or about why it's wrong to laugh too hard at someone's pain, even if it's staged. Older fans of the franchise might debate whether this installment adds anything meaningful or simply rides the coattails of the originals. And for some, it becomes a guilty pleasure that they revisit just to relive the nostalgic chaos of holiday movie marathons. Home Alone 4 doesn't just entertain, it provokes reactions, both strong and mixed. It's the kind of film that leaves some viewers groaning and others laughing, but either way, it keeps people talking. Its engagement isn't always polished, but it's undeniable, because whether through humor, nostalgia, or relatable family themes, it manages to keep its audience leaning forward just enough to see what happens next. When comparing Home Alone 4 to other films in the franchise, the differences are striking. The first two movies set the gold standard for holiday slapstick comedy, with Macaulay Culkin's Kevin becoming an iconic character. Those films balanced heart and humor so well that they became annual traditions. Home Alone 3, while introducing a new kid and villains, at least tried to keep the spirit of the formula alive with bigger, more inventive traps and a fresh setting. Home Alone 4, however, feels like it belongs in a different league altogether, with its made-for-TV style, smaller scale, and recast characters that audiences already felt deeply attached to. Instead of reinventing the formula or introducing a clever twist, it almost plays like an alternate reality where Kevin has been dropped into a parallel version of his own story. Fans who grew up with the original films find it jarring to see familiar names played by different actors. That alone sets it apart from most sequels in the genre, which usually bring in entirely new characters rather than rewriting old ones. In this way, it stands out, but not always for reasons that work in its favor. Against other holiday family comedies of the early 2000s, Home Alone 4 sits more comfortably. Films like Deck the Halls, Christmas with the Cranks, and Jingle All the Way all relied heavily on over-the-top hijinks, cartoonish villains, and chaotic holiday energy. Compared to those, Home Alone 4 doesn't feel completely out of place, though it lacks the polish and theatrical charm of its contemporaries. Where those movies leaned into larger-than-life performances and slick production, this film often feels like a scaled-down, Saturday afternoon TV special, complete with sets that never quite look as lived-in as they should. In terms of the franchise's identity, it becomes clear that Home Alone 4 leans almost entirely on name recognition. The traps are smaller, the villains less memorable, and the emotional core less impactful compared to the first two entries. Still, it tries to maintain its place within the series by revisiting familiar beats: a clever kid setting booby traps, bumbling adults falling victim, and the reminder that family, even in chaos, is what matters most. It's the formula, but distilled down to its simplest and safest version. Looking beyond the franchise, when stacked against other family adventure comedies, it reveals how much audiences value tone and execution. Movies like Spy Kids or Agent Cody Banks around the same era gave kids a sense of empowerment and spectacle with inventive gadgets and larger-than-life scenarios. Home Alone 4 sticks closer to household comedy, but because the traps are less inventive and the humor often recycled, it doesn't quite ignite the same excitement. What makes it interesting, though, is the way it highlights how difficult it is to sustain a long-running franchise. By the time this installment arrived, the brand name alone was doing much of the heavy lifting. In that sense, it's comparable to other family franchises that overstayed their welcome, like Problem Child or Beethoven, where later sequels existed more to keep the brand alive than to push creative boundaries. So while Home Alone may not hold up against its own legendary predecessors, it does serve as a fascinating case study of how franchises evolve, adapt, or sometimes simply recycle. It shows how beloved stories get reimagined for new audiences, even if the magic that sparked the originals doesn't always carry over. It's a familiar formula repackaged, a reminder of what worked before, but with just enough differences to make audiences compare it endlessly to the films that came before. Home Alone May 4th seem like a straightforward holiday comedy about a boy outsmarting crooks, but beneath the surface, there are symbolic touches and recurring motifs that give the film an added layer of meaning, whether intentional or not. One of the clearest metaphors lies in Kevin's battle to protect the home. The house itself becomes more than just a setting. It represents stability, security, and belonging in the middle of his family's upheaval. With his parents separated and his life split between two worlds, Kevin's defense of the house mirrors his deeper desire to hold on to a sense of control and safety. Every trap he sets isn't just about defeating burglars. It's about proving that he still has power in a world where the grown-ups seem to have lost theirs. There's also the recurring motif of cleverness versus clumsiness. Kevin's intelligence is exaggerated to near genius levels, while the adults, both villains and sometimes his own parents, are portrayed as bumbling, short-sighted, or easily fooled. This inversion works as more than comedy. It symbolizes a child's perspective of adulthood. To Kevin, adults can't see the dangers he can, and they're too distracted by their own problems to protect him, leaving him to step into a role of responsibility that shouldn't even be his. The traps are metaphors for problem-solving and resilience, showing that even in chaotic family dynamics, resourcefulness can restore a sense of order. The theme of family separation itself carries symbolic weight throughout the film. Kevin is literally caught between two homes, his father's new life and his mother's household. The two burglars he battles can be seen as exaggerated embodiments of the chaos divorce brings into a child's world. They keep intruding on his space, forcing him to take action and claim ownership over the one thing he can control: his environment. His victories against them feel like symbolic victories against the instability of his family situation. Even the choice of villains, familiar but oddly reimagined, carries metaphorical undertones. By bringing back names like Marv, though with different portrayals, the film signals the idea that some problems never go away. They just come back in new forms, and Kevin has to keep confronting them. It's a cycle, much like the way children of divorce often face repeating challenges as parents navigate new relationships and households. There are subtler visual metaphors too. The luxury of the smart house, with its gadgets and technology, can be read as a symbol of surface-level progress masking deeper dysfunction. The house is impressive, sleek, and advanced, but it doesn't solve the real problem: the fractures in Kevin's family. Similarly, all the high-tech conveniences Kevin manipulates are only effective because he uses them with creativity and heart. The message is clear: technology, wealth, or appearances cannot replace love and family unity. Even the traps themselves often carry metaphorical weight. Slipping, falling, crashing into walls, these aren't just physical gags. They represent how adults who underestimate children inevitably lose their balance, their authority, and their control. The chaos Kevin creates is a kind of poetic justice, a metaphorical punishment for arrogance and carelessness. Each pratfall is symbolic of adults ignoring a child's perspective until it's too late. So while Home Alone 4 operates first and foremost as a family comedy, it carries layers of symbolism tucked into its humor and chaos. The home as a fortress, Kevin as the unlikely protector, and the villains as stand-ins for instability all add thematic weight. Beneath the slapstick and silliness, the film quietly reminds its audience that what children crave most isn't luxury or cleverness. It's security, stability, and a place where they truly belong. When looking at Home Alone 4 within the broader franchise, it stands out as one of the most unusual entries because of how it approaches continuity. Instead of moving forward with entirely new characters like Home Alone 3 did, this film goes back to the original names: Kevin, Marv, Kevin's parents, but recasts them with new actors and drops them into a storyline that doesn't quite align with the events of the earlier films. It almost feels like a reboot before reboots became the Hollywood trend, creating a strange space where it's both part of the series and yet disconnected from the mythology audiences knew so well. In the grand context of the Home Alone franchise, the first two films were set in stone as holiday classics, forever tied to the image of Macaulay Culkin outsmarting Harry and Marv. Home Alone 3 was a bold experiment, distancing itself entirely from Kevin and shifting to a new kid with new villains. Whether or not people loved that change, at least it carved out a separate corner of the franchise. Then came Home Alone 4, which confused things by reintroducing the McCallisters but reshaping their family dynamic. In this timeline, Kevin's parents are divorced, his father has a new fiancée, and the villains are familiar yet altered. This creates an odd alternate history, as if we're watching a what-if scenario of Kevin's life rather than a linear continuation. In terms of historical context for filmmaking, Home Alone 4 also reflects the early 2000s trend of stretching popular properties beyond their theatrical shelf life. By the time this installment appeared, the brand recognition of Home Alone was strong enough to attract viewers, but not strong enough to guarantee a big-screen release. That's why it went straight to television, a move that instantly framed it as a smaller, less prestigious project. It mirrors what happened with other family franchises of the era, like Beethoven or Air Bud, which also saw later sequels shift to TV or direct-to-video. It was part of a broader cultural moment when studios realized they could recycle familiar names for quick content without the massive budgets or expectations of theatrical films. From a narrative standpoint, Home Alone 4 doesn't add much to the overarching story of Kevin McCallister. Instead, it functions more like an alternate holiday special, one that revisits themes of independence, resilience, and family bonds, but in a looser, more experimental way. For die-hard fans, this makes it a curiosity, a footnote in the franchise rather than a cornerstone. For younger viewers at the time, though, it may have been their first exposure to the Home Alone brand, introducing the concept of a clever kid fighting off burglars even if the execution was different from the classic. Its place in the franchise also highlights how powerful nostalgia can be. Even with all the differences, simply using the name Kevin McCallister was enough to spark recognition and draw comparisons to the original films. That decision shows how studios rely on audience memory to keep a series alive, even when the storytelling choices bend continuity to the breaking point. Home Alone may not strengthen the overarching narrative of the series, but it does reveal how franchises evolve over time, adapting to new mediums and audiences while still clinging to the names and ideas that made them famous in the first place. In that sense, the historical importance of Home Alone 4 is less about the story it tells and more about what it represents. The early 2000s strategy of squeezing more life out of beloved properties, experimenting with TV movies, and reimagining familiar characters in ways that sometimes confused as much as they entertained. It's not a central chapter in Kevin's saga, but it's a fascinating snapshot of how Hollywood handles a franchise long after its golden age. Talking about the budget and financial side of Home Alone 4 is almost as fascinating as the film itself, because unlike its blockbuster predecessors, this installment didn't even make it to the big screen. The earlier Home Alone movies were box office juggernauts, massive hits that raked in hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide and became holiday traditions practically overnight. By contrast, Home Alone 4 was produced as a made-for-television movie, which meant it had a much smaller budget and never had the chance to prove itself in theaters. That alone changes the way we think about its financial performance, because there were no ticket sales to measure, no opening weekend numbers to track, and no records to break. Instead, its success depended more on television ratings and later home video sales. When you watch the movie, you can feel the difference in budget. The sets don't have the same warmth or detail as the McCallister house from the first two films, which felt like a real family home brimming with Christmas magic. Instead, the sleek and modern smart house setting in Home Alone 4 sometimes looks more like a stage than a lived-in environment. The traps, too, reflect the tighter budget. Gone are the elaborate, Rube Goldberg-style contraptions from the earlier films that required extensive stunt work and clever practical effects. In their place are smaller, simpler gags that rely more on the novelty of a high-tech house than on large-scale physical comedy. The difference in production quality is noticeable, and it's one of the reasons audiences often compare it less favorably to the originals. Because it was made for TV, marketing also looked very different. There weren't flashy trailers playing in cinemas or massive billboard campaigns. Instead, it was promoted through television spots and holiday programming schedules, aimed squarely at families looking for something festive to watch together. This limited push meant it didn't generate the same cultural buzz that theatrical releases enjoyed. It was more of a holiday special dropped into living rooms than a major cinematic event. Financially, the movie didn't need to earn hundreds of millions to justify itself. Its budget was much smaller, and success was measured by whether or not it drew enough viewers to the channel airing it and whether families bought or rented it afterward during the holiday season. From that perspective, it was less a box office disappointment and more a low-risk project designed to squeeze a bit more mileage out of a famous franchise name. For the network, its real value lay in giving audiences something new to pair with reruns of the first two classics, keeping Home Alone relevant in the early 2000s without investing in a theatrical release. Audience reception, however, had a major influence on how the film was remembered financially. While kids who discovered it on TV may have enjoyed the antics, longtime fans were often disappointed by the recast characters, weaker traps, and smaller scale. This meant that while the movie may have covered its costs and achieved its modest TV goals, it never came close to the enduring profitability of the first films. It didn't inspire merchandise, repeated re-releases, or massive home video sales in the same way. Instead, it exists as a quiet corner of the franchise, financially safe but creatively limited. So in the bigger picture, Home Alone 4's budget and financial journey tell a story of contrast. From the billion-dollar success of the original films to the stripped-down, television-focused approach here, it illustrates how a once mighty franchise shifted into a different mode of production. It didn't crash and burn financially, but it also didn't soar. Instead, it landed safely in the middle, a cost-controlled TV experiment that kept the brand alive without ever aiming for the towering box office heights of its legendary beginnings. Home Alone 4 isn't a film you'll ever find on the big screen because it was created as a made-for-television release. That means no theatrical runs, no box office ticket lines, and no midnight premieres with audiences cheering when Kevin outsmarts the bad guys. Instead, this entry made its debut straight into living rooms, designed to be watched on a cozy couch rather than in a crowded theater. That origin defines how people still experience it today. For audiences wanting to revisit it now, streaming services are usually the easiest gateway. Depending on licensing agreements, the movie often finds itself bundled alongside the rest of the Home Alone collection, especially during the holiday season when streaming platforms know families are searching for festive comedies to binge. It may not always be on the most popular platform year-round, but when December rolls around, it has a way of reappearing like clockwork, tucked in between the classics that made the franchise famous. If you don't catch it on streaming, digital rental and purchase options are often available, giving you the ability to watch it on demand whenever the mood for holiday mischief strikes. Television is still a natural home for it, though. Networks that love running Christmas marathons or family-friendly programming frequently add Home Alone 4 to their lineup. This is how many kids in the early 2000s first saw it, flipping channels during December, stumbling upon Kevin's antics, and sticking around long enough to laugh at the chaos. Watching it this way keeps the spirit of its original release intact, as a made-for-TV holiday event that isn't meant to dominate the big screen but rather to sneak into your holiday viewing schedule. The best way to experience the movie isn't in isolation but as part of a marathon. Watching it alongside the earlier Home Alone entries gives context to why this installment feels so different and highlights how the franchise shifted over time. It's fun to compare Kevin's high-tech smart house traps here with the more grounded, classic booby traps of the first two films. Seeing them back-to-back makes Home Alone 4 feel like a quirky cousin to the originals, less polished, but still trying to carry the same spirit. If you want the fullest impact, the key is setting. This isn't a film to analyze with a critical eye in a quiet room. It thrives in a family environment, with kids giggling at the slapstick and adults commenting on how strange it is to see new actors playing familiar characters. It's best consumed in the glow of Christmas lights, maybe with hot cocoa in hand, where the flaws become part of the fun and the energy of the holidays fills in what the production couldn't. So whether you track it down on streaming, catch it on TV, or dig out an old DVD copy from a holiday box set, Home Alone 4 is most enjoyable when treated as a piece of holiday background chaos. It's not about cinematic grandeur but about the shared experience of laughing, groaning, and reminiscing as Kevin once again takes on burglars in the most outrageous ways he can manage.